Hello students, welcome to the special lecture series of the DBMS and SQL questions. In this series, we will discuss some important questions in reference to your Viva examinations and your interview in reference to the DBMS and SQL. So let's go through with some important questions that can be asked in your Viva examinations or in your interviews. So let us start with the one question number one, that is what are the data and information and how they are related in a database. So we all know that data is recorded facts, basically raw facts and figures. In the database, this data is recorded fact and figures, and information is knowledge that we derived from that particular data. So whatever the things we store into the tables, in our relational tables, that is known as the data. And whenever we query from those on those relational table and we retrieve something from that, so that something is known as your information. A database stores data in such a way that information can be created, can be retrieved also. So whatever we store in the tables, in the relations, these are the raw facts and figures, and whenever we query on those tables, the query result will be known as the information. The next question, what is enterprise resource planning? We have all heard about this term. ERP is a very common term these days, ERP. And what kind of database is used in an ERP application? So it is one of the very common term and very commonly used system in all the organizations today. So by ERP, this is an information system that is used in manufacturing companies and includes sales, inventories, production, planning, purchasing, and other business functions. So it's the enterprise resource, as you can see from the name, resource planning. So this includes all the departments of the company, such that the sales, the inventory, production, planning, purchasing, all the departments are included into this. So this is basically an information system that keeps the information about different departments, manages the information, and help in retrieving the information from the information system. So this is basically a database system, a multi-user database system, which helps in different departments to communicate and to retrieve information. The next question is a very common question. What is a DBMS? A very common question and is asked in most of the Vivas and most of the interviews. So what is DBMS? That is, stands for Database Management System, and it receives a request from applications and translates those requests into actions on a specific database. And a DBMS processes SQL statements or uses other functionality to create, process, and administer database. So all companies have database. To manage that database, we need a DBMS, that is Database Management System. A database management system stores information, it accepts the request from the front end applications, then translates those requests into the database actions, and after those actions, it provides the response in the form of the information. For all those purpose, for taking the request and giving the response, it processes the SQL statements. It uses the SQL, that is the structured query language. With the help of the SQL, it create, process, and administrate a database. So for the creation, that means storing the information, for the retrieving the information, for managing the users, and for administrating the database. For all the purposes, we use the SQL language. Now let's talk about the next question, which is why is a database considered to be self-describing? This is a property or one characteristic of the database, self-describing nature. A database system should have a self-describing nature. So in addition to the users data, a database contains a description of its own structure that is known as the metadata. So a database contains this metadata. Now what we mean by the metadata? Metadata is basically data about data. So it will describe the data. So metadata is itself describing the data. For example, if we are using a property, a variable in the entity, let's say u underscore name. So just by the name u underscore name, we are not clear that what it is, but in the metadata we will see the description of this variable u underscore name. Maybe it is written that a variable to store the username. So we have in that sense we have the idea that okay, u underscore name is a variable that stores the usernames. So this is the self-describing nature that is provided by the DBMS, by the database, in the form of metadata. Now next is, who is AF Cod, and why is he significant in the development of the modern database systems? Yes, you must have heard about the AF Cod rules. So these were very important and fundamental rules of the database. So while working at IBM, AF Cod created the relational database model. He published a paper in 1970, presented the idea in the world at large, and his work in the foundation, the most it's a foundation in the most of the DBMS currently. Uh, and those forms the basis of the database system as we know and use them today. So he was the we can say he was the developer of the relational database model. He has given some rules, some important fundamental rules that are applied today to all the RDBMSs, and that is why those rules are known as CODS rules on his name, after his name. Now the next question, what is SQL and why it is important? As we all know, this is a language, but yes, it is very much different from the other programming languages. It is known as the query language, a structured query language. And why it is important to deal with the database, to provide the request, to retrieve the information, to update the information into the database. That means to deal with the database, we need the SQL language. So SQL stands for structured query language, and it is the most important data processing language. Yes, this is important term, data processing language. So this is the most important data processing language. It is not a complete programming language like Java or any other C sharp, but a data sub language used for creating and processing databases. So these are the important term. Why we use SQL? We use SQL to create and process databases, data and its metadata. And almost all DBMS produces almost all DBMS products, either it is Oracle or it is MySQL or it is any other database product, especially relational, that uses SQL, structured query language. So the next question, it is a practical oriented question. Write an SQL select statement to display all the columns of the student table, but only those rows where the grade column is greater than or equal to 90. A very simple query. You need to write a select statement to display all columns. We use that wildcard, that is asterisk. So select asterisk from the table name student and where the condition is given on the grade column, and the condition was greater than equal to 30. So the simple query statement. Now let's talk about the next question. Name and briefly describe the 5 SQL built-in functions. Right, so these are the built-in functions we can talk about. Let's talk about these building functions. AVG for the average, count. AVJ count is to count the number of rows, sum is to find out the sum of all the values in a column. The AVJ is to find the average value. Max will be used to find out the maximum value in a column, and similarly min will be used to find out the minimum value in a column. So all these values, all these are the functions, the built-in functions that can be used with the SQL. Next is, write an SQL select statement to count the number of rows in a student table and display the result with the label num students. So we have two important things in this query to do. One is to use the count inbuilt function, and other is to use the as clause to rename the resultant column. So we can see that select count asterisk, so we will use count asterisk, and this is as it is a clause that will rename the resultant column as num students, and from the table is student. The next question, the last question for the day, uh, what is an SQL subquery? Right, we have already seen the concepts of the subqueries and nested queries. So basically subquery is a query which transfers or fetch the result to another query. So it is basically a pipelining. So when we perform select sub select query, it fetches some result from some rows, and those rows or results are fed back into another query. So an SQL subquery is a means of querying two or more tables at the same time. The subquery itself is an SQL select statement that is a kind of container within the where clause of another SQL select statement and separated by being enclosed in parentheses. Some subqueries have equivalent SQL join structures, but correlated subqueries cannot be duplicated by a join. So basically, in a simple sentence, if we'll see that what we mean by a subquery, so a subquery where we use more than one queries and the result of one query is fed back as condition to the second query. So we have discussed the top 10 questions today. Hopefully we will try to discuss another questions in the next lecture. Thank you so much.